It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
Hi, guys. I'm Chad Jetner.
I'm Els Tahura.
And I'm Kyle Bacher.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
We are going to talk about being on the edge, the cutting edge, the bleeding edge. Why do you go there? How do you bring your customers or your company along for the ride? Should you, shouldn't you? Are you hearing me, Peter?
I am now.
Do I have to
I felt like you were doing a soft monologue and I had to listen closely.
I was telling bedtime stories and you're feeling very sleepy. Very sleepy. So now I've done this where we've decided to go with something that wasn't quite baked with the idea that it would be baked before we were done with dinner. I don't know, to keep the analogy going.
To keep the baking analogy?
There was key items that would be ready as we needed them to be ready, or at least within a reasonable time frame. They were not showstoppers, like mission critical things that if they didn't happen for some reason, or if they didn't work the way we thought, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So how do you take that journey? There's so many new things coming out, different types of databases. Well, you can just look at all the services on Azure, AWS, and see just the scale of things going on.
Indeed.
So, Chad, you've worked as an architect. Peter, I believe you have too, in some regards. Al?
That's what I've heard too.
On occasion, yes. I would say more frequently I'm a member of the development team, but yep.
And I'll say kind of with SharePoint, with stuff that's pre-built that you just kind of have to set up and configure. It's architecture light.
But SharePoint's a good example of things that keep coming out with new features that may or may not exist and may or may not function the way that the documentation says, right?
Yeah.
Back to your example.
Like they'll have there's a core set of features that work just fine. Worked as design. And there's always this other list of, and wait, there's more.
And here's a really cool thing that you want to do.
Not only will you get document libraries, but you'll also get 15 different kinds of lists and all of these wonderful things.
12 of them will work.
Of publishing pages versus wiki pages versus modern pages, all these bits and pieces that are always in transition. They're always adding to one thing and then moving away from something else.
Right.
So modern right now for SharePoint Online, modern pages are the thing they're investing in. And they're getting rid of all the legacy stuff. So within a tool like Microsoft 365, you're going to get a lot of cutting edge type scenarios that you can deal with. Hey, this stuff just came out.
New things are coming out every single day or practically every single day, right?
Right.
And you can choose to use them and help develop them into something stronger that gets used later on, or you can choose to ignore them, right?
Yeah, you don't have to use it all.
And I know, Chad, you said that Java was perfect in 2002. I think
it was perfect again in 2008. It was perfect again in 2016.
Was it always perfect, or was it re-perfected each of those years?
Polished, I think is the right way to say it. But I could have. I mean, code that I wrote in 2001 would still run today. I have more syntactic sugar today than I've ever had before in my life. I'm excited for the next version. It's going to add even more stuff. It keeps getting more and more perfect.
Well,
so have you found yourself looking ahead? You're scoping up a project, you're looking ahead at what's out there, what you should use, what bits and pieces.
It's tough, right? Because like, what if you don't pick? This is what I like. So we have our DNA, right? That is such a great thing for us to have, because otherwise, you know, your world is so small. So you're like, well, can I use graph databases yet? Is that going to be a thing is that a fad? Is it a, like, it looks cool, there's a lot of great stuff here, but then what, right? Like graph, that's one of my key things is looking at that. It's foundational. It's a different idea it's a different way of looking at your data than like relational databases, old school stuff. However, do I go into a client, do I go into a fresh project where I've got kind of a green field ahead of me and say, yeah, we're going to go all in on graph databases and it's going to do this and it's going to do this, because you've got so many hurdles there, not just with hoping to God that your tech stack is durable enough, but you've also got to pull in and train likely a whole new team of developers on a whole new way of doing things, and hope to gosh that they're along for the ride. It's right. Social. It's
well, even just like individual software, like, okay, we're using a graph database. Do we have a middleware that we can use within our applications to communicate with that database, or do we actually need to run raw commands, or do we have an IDE that doesn't make it a nightmare to develop?
And then as we're building out these architectures, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to use this thing to solve this problem and it's going to be great and they're going to love it, obviously. But then you got to look at their whole world, right?
Yep.
All right, we're going to stuff a bunch of stuff into a graph database. But what does their data lake do? How does that need the data? How does the data warehouse need the data, right? Is there a way for them to take that different technology and apply it to whatever reporting needs they have over here and over here? And oh man, it's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to take this bleeding edge thing and put it in my customer's environment and they're going to love it. It's I'm going to take this bleeding edge thing and kind of play with it at home a little bit before.
Yeah. Depending on where it is in the stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's a different.
Have you ever been forced to go with something bleeding edge? Like, there's nothing else that is going to do what you want it to do except for this neat thing we can plug into it.
I don't know that I've been forced, really. I mean, like, a lot of our authentication and authorization patterns changed over the last, I want to say decade, Peter, maybe 15 years.
Probably.
Maybe, right? But like, I'm thinking of like the OICD stuff, the OpenID Connect stuff.
Single sign-on has been a banner for a long time and is now becoming a reality.
Right.
More easy and very easily, right?
Well, but the barrier, I mean, it's a little dense getting into it for the very first time, right? Making sure all your application IDs match your resource IDs, and oh my gosh, there's so much going on there.
Right.
But once
when it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And then but it's the whole problem though, right? The very first time we've implemented that, you're dealing with other folks that are like, all right, here's your OAuth provider, right?
Right.
Just go there and you follow the standard. Well, nobody knows at one point, nobody knew the standard. So you got to bring them along for the ride, train them. And then if you're lucky, you get to do it multiple times a year. So that skill set doesn't go dull, right? You don't kind of forget terminology and the connective tissue between your providers and your consumers and all that stuff.
Yep.
If you're not lucky, you only do that every 6 years. Like, oh, notification, I got to set this up, and there, it's done. I don't have to worry about it. Put it on a shelf. I don't have to take it out and play. I don't have to take that off the shelf and play with it for another few months.
Right.
But
I would say I'll go ahead, Chad.
No, you go ahead. I talked enough.
I was just going to say, kind of in contrast, I have had situations where a bleeding edge tech has been, we'll say, forced upon me. on the data side, as data has become a thing that has a nice capital letter and
data is super important these days.
Yes. There's been an explosion of lots of different tools that can move your data around and transform your data around and help with deployments. And I have been on teams where somebody went to a very interesting sales presentation and bought all in. Yes. And so in those scenarios, it's rough. Basically exactly because of the reasons that Chad mentioned, where you try to integrate a tool and all of a sudden you realize that this tool was purchased without thinking about things like, how does this fit into our software development lifecycle? Does this meet our security requirements? What does it mean for people who, like team members who might be overseas? Can they install it on their machine and still access the cloud resources or things like that? So it's rough. And I would say in those situations, if there is no way of backing out of that tool, if you're stuck with we're inundated with, here are 12 reasons why this won't work. If you're stuck with it, you end up having to work towards a situation where you're partially using the tool and trying to overcome the problems of that tool with what you already have. And that can work in the short term. Sure. So when we're talking about AWS services or Azure services or GCP services, sometimes it's exciting to be essentially the live beta testers of a brand new service. You have to go into it knowing that out the gate, it will do some of what you want. And either it will grow and you'll gradually be able to move more and more of your workload into that service, or you need to be prepared to back out of it and have a plan for that if all of a sudden there aren't enough people using that service and it goes down. So it's risky and it can pay off, but there's not a guarantee that being on the bleeding edge will pay off.
Well, everything you're doing is solving a problem of some kind.
Yep.
Everything you put together when you architect a solution, each piece is solving a problem. It all has a function. And it's like, if this solves problem A, but it brings in problems B, C, D, and E, is it the right one? Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, maybe the decision isn't a practical one. Maybe it's, this will be fun because we've never used it. Let's try this thing out.
I don't know that that's
we got into that before. With one of our own websites and the way
this thing will be fun.
Yeah. I've heard that phrase before, and obviously, usually it's going back to what you said, Al. Somebody comes back from a conference or a demo, and all four of us made the same face at the same time because we've all had that experience where somebody has gone off and said, "I went to this conference. This tool will do exactly what we need for this thing," and then almost every time it does not do exactly what you need for this thing, but you're either invested so far that you're working workarounds, or you found problems B, C, D, E, and F early enough and say, whoa, we're solving A. We're not trying to create new problems. Let's pull back a little bit if we can. And then, like to Chad's point, talking about OAuth and stuff like that, I know that's been some of those things that have been, thrust upon you. Like, we need to do OAuth for this, right? Yeah. Say, I don't know, some sort of cabin lottery or something where we need to enable multi-factor authentication, because the internet's a big, scary place. And thankfully, the tools and everything have come along that made that easy. But there's a lot of times where you're like, I haven't done this before. I need to do this. I will try to do a small scale sample if I can, taking Chad's example, like, I'll go play with this and make my toy example work. And if I can't get my toy example to work, then I'm really not going to do it. But if I do get the toy example to work, then we'll try to do the real world example.
Well, I think the toys don't really, the toys are really like, for me, how does the language work, or how does the configuration work, and what are the capabilities? And you don't really get to explore the edge cases. But then with what we do now, we go to a customer where your toy example is, it's not just, does this toy can this toy solve this one specific problem? It's, can this toy solve that problem? And will it live within this entire organization's ecosystem to the degree that we need it to, right? Because maybe it's, oftentimes we have to not just like build one little thing. We've got to build one little thing that feeds into dozens of other systems.
If you're super lucky, it's at one end of the stack or the other end of the stack. But if it's right in the middle of the stack, then you've got to play nice with everybody.
Yeah, if you're speaking specifically of graph stuff, right? Like, if you're a source of truth for other folks, then you've got to be able to provide that source of truth via whatever they use to pull it, right?
Right.
If you're not, maybe you got a little bit more rope to play with, but that's what makes me nervous about a lot of like the bleeding edge like things. Not really the languages anymore, because languages and libraries that support the languages, a lot of organizations just kind of like, bring BYOL, right? Like, bring your own language. We don't really care anymore. It's going to go into a Docker container and we're going to deploy it out into our environment and you'll be fine. We'll find a way to support a language, but it's all of the stuff around it. I had to Google it really quick, and this OAuth 2 has been around since 2013, so a decade. So we're not really talking about brand new bleeding edge things anymore.
No.
But the example applies itself to a lot of these.
But we weren't doing it in 2013, right?
No,
like if you were doing OAuth in 2013, you were really fixing some bugs for people.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that is bleeding edge stuff for me personally has been a really good case for when younger or newer or less experienced team members really are fun, because it's really easy to get excited about a new technology. And that excitement can sometimes get dulled with experience. So I found on projects that it's really helpful to have that balance of optimism and pessimism on the team, and has actually also been a really good opportunity for teams to bond more and kind of mutually support each other, where, okay, here's a newer member of the team who really wants to, I'll keep it with GraphQL, wants to keep working with GraphQL or graph databases. Not obviously, those are two separate things, but and they can go and do some more research and partner with a more senior developer who then can kind of explain, okay, this is really cool. It looks like it would be fun to work with. Here are the problems. Here are the things we need to make sure that we can account for in order to be able to pitch it. That's just been the experience I've had on other teams that has been really, really, really nice, that where bleeding edge tech can sometimes be good for even just morale and team relationships, even if you're not ultimately going to use it.
I mean, that's a great point, because how do you keep the team invested and excited about a project? And sometimes it is by, we could do this in super old technology that we already have, or we could look at super new technology. And, we've all been to clients that have failed to look forward to that new technology, and they're dragging behind.
Mm-hmm.
Y2K was a great example of that, right? COBOL programmers were paid an amazing amount of money to come in and change a date field, right?
Well, and I think like the security requirements, the need for multi-factor, OAuth and TLS and all those things, single sign-on, the need for apps to be able to authenticate that way has kind of driven some things forward. Like Office 2010 had basic authentication. So
Right.
there was it wasn't going to recognize your multi-factor.
Ever.
So then it was sunset, and they don't mind doing that anyway, pushing you toward the next version. But things like that happen where the world changes and you got to catch up. But if you're one of those people lagging behind, you're going to be forced through every one of those changes as they come down the road. And it's going to be a scramble of, okay, now it's real. Now it's really happening. We don't have a choice. And we got to make this big purchase this year that we didn't really budget for. So I think that whether or not you're going to dive into bleeding edge stuff, you do need to keep up to a degree with where the world's at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we also talked about bringing, the junior developers up to speed. Sometimes if they're not excited about it because they just learned how to do the old thing really well and they feel like they're an expert now, and you're like, nope, guess what? We're not doing that anymore. You're doing new stuff and
welcome to the world of tech.
And bring them along.
Speaking of bleeding edge software and technology and how it intersects with Taylor Swift, she actually deployed facial recognition software at her shows ahead of a lot of folks. I don't know that a lot of folks are legit on deploying that, but there's articles about how Taylor Swift and her influence on facial recognition has sparked kind of an industry. So she would do this thing where you walk into her show and you walk by this camera and it does facial recognition, identifies if you're a stalker or not, and then later on you can walk into a selfie booth that has a lot of I don't know what a selfie booth is, how it's different than a photo booth, but
I'm
it's
trying
one of
to
the
tell
cases that where it's a well-meaning, really cool kind of novel use for something like that literally nobody really seems to have thought about the implications that would have outside of her one specific use case, right? Like privacy concerns, the data privacy issues around that. That just sounds really cool, and then it sounds like really horrible.
I'm sure she's really locking that stuff down so that nobody can steal pictures of everybody that attended
the most secure selfie booth ever.
Yeah, I don't
if you're in
Swift
hiding and
attending
don't
HackerCon, right? Just to learn about all the vulnerability.
If you're in hiding and you don't want to be seen, are you going to go out to a Taylor Swift show and go into the booth and get whatever scans have to happen? Are you going to even, there's probably something in the agreement, in the ticket, they've got to cover their butts.
Oh, yes. I'm sure all the Taylor Swift fans read the EULA when they purchase her stuff.
I would.
But I feel like
knowing what you just told me.
That comes back to, though, Chad, what you kind of started with is just what bleeding edge technology is good for what circumstance. That there are times when it's useful, fun, profitable, but facial recognition software is not needed in people's home bathrooms, as an example. So, or to take a more specific work example, quantum computing has been something that is buzzing around as this is the new hot thing. This is the Hansel, for my old Zoolander reference. But if we're working at clients that have a small to medium sized retail application, no, No, they don't need quantum computing. It might be fun and super cool, but that's not a good use case for that technology. It's bleeding edge tech is not good in and of itself. It's good in specific applications for specific people.
That's why some of the stuff with like AWS and other cloud providers is so great, because you don't have to invest an insane amount of money to play with like quantum computing, right? Like you can POC stuff super, super fast and say, yeah, I'm building a shopping cart application for, I don't know, name a retail, like
small retailer near you.
Yeah, for Patina in Minneapolis. I'm building the shopping cart. Does Patina need a quantum computing instance powering that shopping cart? Probably not. But if you're building out mathematical models of various things, do you need a quantum computing instance? Honestly, don't know. Would it help? Would it be worse? Does it even run the types of things you need to run against it? Who knows? Kind of fun to have that option to just like flip a switch, turn something on, send it some data, see what happens. So there is.
That's certainly cutting down on the bleeding, right? Like
right.
That is a lot less.
Yeah, like it dulls the sharp edges around bleeding edge stuff, right? Because you're not like immediately invested in it, right? You can back out quickly.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, unless you discover the magical formula for small retail shopping cart that done on a quantum computer is, fabulous, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sends you the stuff before you order it. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right. I think cloud and cloud native apps are certainly taking away a lot of that pain that, growing up, I'll say, there was a lot of pain involved. When .NET came out, for example, which, has happened in my lifetime. Java came out, that happened in my lifetime. All of those things kind of like, whoa, wait, do I really want to do Java or do I not want to do Java? Did I make the right decision? I have no idea. I'll never know until the game's over. But Java honestly was one of those decisions that was a challenge for a lot of people when it came out, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a brand new language, brand new concept. It had sandboxing and lots of other features that we take for granted now. And, you just didn't even, you're like, well, I don't know. Can I make it do what I want it to do?
Yeah. And how do we do that today, though? Like, I don't even really look at the language and the features or anything. I look at the libraries and the organizational structure of, like, is there a centrally located thing, or is it like JavaScript? It's just like chaos. Not that JavaScript is bad anymore, but, or is there like a managing body? What was the other? PHP. That was the chaotic one, where it was just like, let's just throw literally every single thing in as a function, and they do different things depending on the I forget what the heck happened there. I hadn't done PHP in a long time, but I think of like newer things like well, I don't even know if it's still considered new, but R, right?
Right.
R programming language. Can it accomplish X, Y, and Z? And is there a community around it? And does it look messy, or does it look kind of reasonable?
And
right?
Should we start switching our Java practice over to the R practice, right?
And and with those kinds of things too, it's, for me, it's totally with you, Chad, that the having an idea, okay, how is this organized? How many other packages are leveraging this language? It's also, I guess, I want documentation. I want to see Stack Overflow posts on it so that I can feel more comfortable knowing that when I or another one of my team members get stuck, we can do some Googling. Because chances are the language is not going to be the driver of profit. Like, ultimately, we're making software. We're making working software. I don't want other developers being hung up on how do I hash things. If I know they could do it, off the top of their head, great. But with new languages, you shouldn't expect your team to memorize everything. Like so much of our jobs is professional Googling.
Yeah.
Another thing to that point is like, the UI languages or the JavaScript frameworks that are here now have put some pretty good roots down, but there were others before them that are just gone.
Yeah.
Just so gone. And, using the DNA, for example, is a really good tool that, a lot of times we forget about that, there are people that are investigating things that you haven't even heard of on your team. And you're like, what is that? And then they're like, we need to get rid of and stop doing this thing. And it's like, well, but I like that thing.
I've gone back to the DNA so many times to like look at, oh, okay, I was thinking of using this. And I'm like, oh, it's in the going out the door phase. I'm like, yeah, that tracks, right? Because if I'm excited about it, it's probably old.
Well, and because the group knows, right? The group keeps up on, our company keeps up on technology. It's one of our, I don't know that it's a core competency, but it's definitely a core thing that we do all the time is, work with smart people and be smart and stay current with everything.
There's kind of go ahead, Al.
I was just going to ask you a question, Kyle, because we kind of started with you sort of talking about how, SharePoint has changed over the years and that there are a lot of new features to choose from. And so I was curious if you've been in a position where you want to use what might be considered a new or bleeding edge feature. How do you make the case for that to the people that are going to be using the application you're making?
It's usually after some sort of a thing that I call current state analysis. But I don't know how to, like, professional current state analyzers do that, or scientists. So it's me just digging in, figuring stuff out, figuring out what they have. Why is what they have not working? Why don't they like it? Oh, because everything has to come through these two people. And so changes never happen. No one has control of their own destiny. So the need is, I want to control my own chunk of stuff, and I have to be able to like learn it to do that. So the whole use case, the whole business case pointed to that new modern experience for a number of reasons. And chiefly was the ease of use, where, I've trained people in a day that, I've put myself out of a job. I could have been there 2 weeks, but the person I was working with learned enough to say, I think I got it. Okay, well, I guess I'll go home now and break it to our account exec. But, and there was a few things, coming, but there was plenty of examples in preview and all of that stuff to see what it was going to look like, how it was going to work. So, and that was hitting mid-project. Like, okay, We're only gonna be halfway to our launch date when this is supposed to come out. So even if they're a few months late on it, and this part comes right in at the end, so you're just laying it out, and you're being honest about it the whole time. This is not a sales pitch. You are not selling them on the idea of this thing. You're laying it out there and saying, this solves these problems. I think this is the right answer, but here's the bad news that goes with it.
It doesn't exist.
We're not going to have this right away. It might be late. It might be a little different. So we have to weigh all these things. With that,
Right.
you know, they have to come into the decision-making process. And the other thing that I always have to think about is what happens when I walk out the door.
Right.
Like if the solutions I'm building require me to be part of it, if I'm now part of the back end of the system,
you're the built-in organization.
Yeah. If I have to stay there forever, maybe it wasn't the right thing. Or maybe they need a person full time, and it's like, okay, was that part of the deal? And for a lot of this stuff, it's like, I don't need a full-time person. We just need to know that there's people out there that do this for a living, so that when we do need somebody, we can call SDG and they can have someone come over and spend a week with us and get us ready for the next 5 years of what we're going to do. So, you know, it's funny looking at the bleeding edge, the cutting edge, the DNA that lists all the technologies and kind of if something is emerging all the way till this thing is dead.
Right. It's dead to us.
When do you, on the converse of this whole thing, when do you in a project decide to adopt something that's like, wait, I was almost out the door. I was dying. Don't keep me alive. What are you doing? Of course, I'm only speaking about InfoPath, but if we're gonna make these forms that do what they need to do, then the only tool right now that makes any sense is InfoPath that'll do that. Because your current developers that use this other system will be able to make that transition.
Right.
Of course, 3 years ago, I was at a conference where Microsoft said InfoPath is going away. And they say that every year, but I told them, there's way too many people running their businesses off of InfoPath for them to just pull the plug on it. So it's going to be around for a couple more years, between 2 and 20 years, until there is a likely replacement for it.
Right.
And then that's where the other thing is there's blood in the water. So there's other places now probably springing up to tackle this problem. Hey, we can provide a way better solution than InfoPath, but not only that, we can provide an upgrade path or a migration path to reduce all that work.
Yep.
So, this is almost like, where do you land on that DNA scale, and for what reasons? You kind of, and I think for what we do, we all have that kind of built into us. We kind of know, Chad, you don't get surprised by the DNA, do you?
Sometimes. I mean, there's a few things on there that I've gotten really comfortable with that are being phased out. JBoss. I love JBoss. I kind of get why JBoss is not really cool anymore. But oh well.
But it was cool in its day, right?
It
really did a good thing.
Yeah. One of the other things that keeps us I'm still a little new to it, but maybe Peter and Elle, you have this where we're forced to keep libraries and everything else up to date when we check in code now, right? Because our code gets sent against static analysis, and that's like, hey, listen, you're using this framework or this library, and there's a known vulnerability in that, so you gotta, there's actual tools and mechanisms now in place at a lot of companies that are kind of forcing you, like grabbing you by the collar and forcing you along this path of relative, maybe not bleeding edge, but
no, but it's hilarious that you say that, because yeah, for the longest time there was none of that. Like, oh, I'm just going to sit with .NET 2.0 for a long time.
Yeah, until something breaks.
Till something breaks. Oh, look, there's something crumbling now.
Yeah, I think it's part of the I
mean, the CI/CD technologies have come along so far that maintaining that library freshness, if you will, that current, everything is current, everything. I know when I build, I don't build any security vulnerabilities into my code. All of those tools coming through the pipeline are just unbelievably amazing and so helpful, and take most of the guesswork and some of the even like, well, no, I really want to use this older library because I'm not ready to move my code to the next version of everything. And thankfully they've kept a little bit going, but now I know I got to get moving to the next version, because if I don't, not good. Because eventually everybody versions everything.
How many architectures are built based on what the architect likes to work with?
98%, probably 99%. Yeah. I mean, and especially with what we're doing, right? By the time I get placed somewhere, our friend Gabriel or Simon, they're not going to put me in an environment that isn't already, where their ecosystem isn't already my tech stack, right? So the broad strokes with what we're going to build right now, with what I'm comfortable with, is Java, right? And likely Spring Boot, and then common patterns around integrations and everything else.
Right.
It's going to be so those are the broad spokes, and then the finer brush strokes are the bleeding edge things that we can toy around with if we want to, right? Like we can fill in
microservices.
Yeah, exactly. Microservices, lambdas to do tactical little things for us if we need to. AI, man, I'd love to talk about AI test automation one of these days, right? Using AI to write and test and do a bunch of meta stuff around your SDLC. You know, like that would be interesting. That's I was going to ask too, like, what's the bleeding edge thing on your radar that you're itching to get into a project or that you want to play with soon?
I think AI is coming. Like, as long as it makes sense, like El's good to remind us, like, just because you want to use the two letters AI doesn't mean you got to. But there will be a time where that's going to make sense for something, and it'll be fun to do.
Yeah, there's some automation happening, and I think it's AI driven, but automation happening around organizing your content,
right?
Scanning through, coming up with metadata, and taking a lot of that manual work out of it. So I know that there's new stuff coming for SharePoint that's supposed to do that. I haven't had a chance to dig into it. I've been predicting it for years that at some point they're going to build something that can organize your stuff for you,
right?
And look at it and go, oh, these are legal documents. Okay, you use DUI, but you also use DWI. So we're going to make those synonyms, and we're going to set up your structure and your metadata and your search and all of that based on legal standard. Like, there's going to be AI that can do that.
Will they do that for my documents folder too? Because I'm a struggling mess with that.
I can show you how to do that. Control A, Control D, I think, is the.
That's the shortcuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't listen to them.
I don't know. Control X, just in case. No, I think that there's nothing wrong with like gravitating towards things you like and you're comfortable with, because it means that they haven't like punched you in the face. They haven't hauled you out back and drag you up and down the parking lot. You've had success with them, and you like the way they work, and you see the potential and all of that. So I think just because a developer likes something doesn't mean like, well, he's just, picking the things he likes. It's like, no, he's, there's been thought into that. Like he's arrived at that conclusion over a series of projects, working with a series of tools, that this one's the bomb.
I don't keep working with technology that fights me at every turn and makes my life a living hell. I prefer technology that works intuitively in the way that I think. So yeah, and 98% of the architectures that I'm going to design are going to be things that I've had success with, because I'm not going to design with things that I've had failure with, because why would you? That would be insane. And that's part of our experience, right? Like I bring to the table years of experience, having failed at some things and succeeded at others, and knowing the difference and choosing to stick with the successes.
You've got that right amount of fear going into something new.
Yeah.
That's going to make you think about it and look at it and test it and
I won't give you an estimate of 2 hours for anything. It doesn't even matter if it's a spelling change. It's not going to be, I'm not going to tell you it's 2 hours, because I've made spelling changes that, made a lot more than 2 hours.
Hal, what's your bleeding edge thing that you actually want to play with and you want to find an excuse to put into a project that you're doing?
More AI-driven data cataloging and governance, for leveraging AI for more specific and dynamic security organization, and then also getting into reverse ETL tools.
Ooh, there you go. If you can reverse ETL, I think a lot of people will be happy.
Yeah, I think the Matrix will finally be destroyed then.
Reverse ETL would be actually kind of cool. Like, you're talking about like enterprise transformation stuff, right?
Yeah.
Oh God, that'd be so great. I've walked through like some TIBCO flows, and what's the new tool? NIME is the open source one, and like it makes sense, and then it abruptly doesn't. And if there was an automation around, like you follow the it's almost like the old songs, where the bouncing ball was bouncing on the words, and I could follow around and like, okay, now what the hell is this?
Yeah, we just went off a cliff. What?
Yeah, there's like one step in the transformation where you're like, this is, oh God, sweet baby Jesus, who is a delight to work with. I don't know. I think for me, it's I still haven't had the opportunity to do like a lot of the Jupyter Notebook stuff. That'd be kind of cool. I don't even know if that's really considered bleeding edge anymore, but
yeah, that's old school.
I know it is kind of old school. But for me, like I haven't had a lot of I haven't had the opportunity to put it into practice before. And then just recently, Jeff Wortman gave a demo of using Flutter for cross-platform mobile app development. Is that about right? That kind of stuff has always been like the cross-platform mobile stacks have always seemed to be kind of a pipe dream. Flutter
almost here.
Yeah, they're always almost here, right? Whether or not you're building native mobile controls by writing HTML or writing actual code and just having a interpreter put it into, whatever. Now it actually seems like it's pretty gosh darn close. So I'd love to play with Flutter. I'd love to play with some Jupyter Notebooks, and I'd love to see what quantum actually means in practice for like massive data science models. That would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that will be cool.
Nice.
SharePoint 2019.
Oh, we're beyond that now.
SharePoint 20.
They don't even put years on it anymore.
Like the scope of work that I do is so broad that it's hard to really spend too much time in any one thing. But I come from working with SharePoint, Office 365, stuff like that. So, and being forced to change, the stream portal is going away. We're losing all our videos. Like, I get to adapt. I don't want to adapt. I have to adapt. They're forcing me to. I don't think we want to lose all of our company's videos that we've worked so hard on and have so much information. But no, I think it's just, for me, it's just trying to keep up and do the right things and glom on to the right stuff. So if we're going to bring in a new platform to do something for us, and then for me, it's also then getting the bigger brains in the room that do more of that stuff. I've got a wealth of knowledge to choose from. I got a lot of experienced people out there. So that's kind of my approach now is I don't have to be the expert. I have to know what the expert needs me to ask them so that they can tell me.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
And with that,
let's say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.